Honesty and forgiveness, two elements of the human condition that really strike a chord with me. Let's think about it for a moment. If people would heal their shame, be honest about who they really are, and forgive themselves and other people, the world would be completely different. I met Colleen through a networking company that I used to own. And I'll have to say, it was one of those things that the universe did, bringing about a divine connection. But it wasn't until this podcast interview that I realized the role that honesty and forgiveness had played for Colleen. Join me for Colleen's story. This is the Highway to Healing. Colleen, 2015 was a year that you have explained or stated previously that the universe woke you up. I'd love to hear your story.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned to you before, 2015 was kind of the culmination of a bunch of things that had been sort of, I don't want to say on the wrong track because our paths are our paths, right? But things were not okay for me for a while. Probably starting, as early as like 2010, 2011. And so for that time, in between, when I first started to go, oh, maybe I'm not doing the right thing. And when the universe actually like really confirmed that I wasn't, I was really trying to hold on to a life that I'd built for myself. And, we think about that sunk cost fallacy, right? We put so much time and energy into this life that we've built, and we know that it doesn't feel like the right thing for us. But, by then, of course, I was married in, a committed relationship. I was, on the path. I was 10 years into a career that I did actually love, but was not finding the fulfillment in that I really needed to. And, was on all kinds of antidepressants, anti-anxiety, and that should have been my clue, right? But so in late 2015, I got my dream job. But the price to pay for that dream job was about 3 months of 100-hour weeks. And we installed a show here on the Strip here in Vegas. And that's just what the installs are like. You work 80 to 100 hours to get the show into whatever theater you're going into as quickly as possible. So, I was not doing well at self-care, and just really, really struggling. My husband at the time and I had finally admitted to one another that we were really unhappy. And we had agreed that after the install was over, that we would go to therapy and that we would try and figure things out. And the universe had other plans. So opening night for that show, I can't get too specific about it, but I was sexually assaulted by a stranger. That was just, of course, horrible. It was violent. It was scary. I had to spend the whole next day at the hospital being interviewed by any number of people. And when my husband and I got home from that, and in the ensuing few weeks, we both just broke down so many times, just recognizing that neither of us had the energy or the will to support one another through what had happened. And so, I felt it coming. I wanted to hold on and maybe try. And it finally turned out, he sat me down one night and he was just like, I can't do this. I cannot do this anymore. And so 3 weeks after we made the decision, I moved out. And that was 6 weeks after the assault. So basically all I had at that point that was left of my old life was my dream job. So, I think if I hadn't had that, I wouldn't have stayed in Vegas and I wouldn't have ultimately found the community and the life that I have now. So something about that job, you know, was like the blessing for me. And it was like the universe saying, okay, you've got this one thing, hold on to this one thing and figure the rest out around it. And so, you know, like many people after divorce, you know, after the ending of any kind of long relationship, you know, it took me a couple of years to get my bearings. You know, I was dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, of course, and I developed a chronic respiratory issue that started as what I thought was bronchitis. Now with, you know, our more general knowledge of, you know, bronchial and respiratory disturbances, I'm wondering if it wasn't some sort of virus at the time. Obviously, I can't confirm that now. But so it started as a really bad bout of bronchitis and then just kept coming back. And kept coming back. And it was either bronchitis or a sinus infection like every other month for over a year. And I knew immediately that it was, you know, partially physical, but it was also partially emotional because, you know, I didn't have as much understanding of the chakras and of the energy centers in the body and all of that. But I was like, this is definitely partially because of all this trauma and all of this upheaval that I've endured. Right. And so I, you know, did the Western medicine thing. I, you know, went to a pulmonologist. I went to an allergist. I went to all these places. They had me on all these medications. I had surgery on my sinuses, which was definitely helpful, but it didn't fix the problem. Right. And I just kept having these infections. And finally, I got sick. It was like after I'd already had this surgery and after I had, you know, been on antibiotics and steroids for the better part of a year and a half, almost 2 years that I had been taking this regimen and I was just constantly on it, that I got sick and I decided I wasn't going to go to the doctor. I decided that I was just going to let my body, like, I remember saying to myself, if I die, at least I'm going to die without all of these drugs in my body. And so I toughed it out. You know, it was not fun. I think I took some ibuprofen, but that was the only thing I took for that entire week. I was really, really sick. And at that point, I made the decision to just move away from allopathic medicine for a little while, and not permanently. I think that there are a lot of things that are great about Western medicine, but it wasn't working for the chronic condition that I developed. And so then, you know, I went through what a lot of people go through, which is, you know, all of the, you know, cleanses you can find on the internet and all of that. And I finally settled and found a really good holistic doctor that got me on a regimen that started to really settle down my immune system, settle down my histamine responses, because I was allergic to like everything at the time. So during that time, I want to say that the awakening happened in 2015, but I didn't really embrace it until I left my job at this show. And I started a job that I was clearly not suited for personality wise, but what it forced me to do was get out and meet a lot of people. And so Dallisa, as you know, I met you that year. I met a bunch of members of the spiritual community here in Vegas, and I started to really get the messages about where my life was going next. And this was about 2 years afterward. And so, you know, Dallisa, you were one of the people that recommended I get certified in Reiki and start really working on, you know, just Reiki 1, to start working on myself energetically and to start moving this stuff out. And from there, I ended up meeting literally almost the day after we spoke, or like a couple days after we spoke. I met my friend, Eric, who certified me in Reiki. We went through the whole 9-month process of really taking the time. You know, he certified me in level 2 and then let me work for 6 months for free and just, you know, develop my energy. And what happened during that time is, you know, I would do self-directed Reiki in the mornings. And one morning I woke up and I was like, what would happen if I sang while I'm doing Reiki? And I started doing it, and it focused the energy in a way that I just hadn't been tuned into before. And it turned into this experience, and I'm getting full body chills now about it. It turned into this experience that I'm like, oh, I'm really onto something here. So I started working with it with the people that I was treating for free. And everybody said the same thing. They're like, this is something else. This is something completely different. And so that turned into me buying, a couple of small singing bowls and starting to incorporate those with the singing and the Reiki. And over the past, I guess now it's been almost 3 years that I've been working with this energy. And I no longer call it Reiki because I don't do the traditional hand motions or anything like that. I really channel this healing energy through the sounds that I create. And I really feel a deep connection to every instrument that I pick up. Sometimes I even feel like I'm connecting to the wood in my ukulele and the tree that was the source of that wood, and the crystals that the singing bowls are made out of, and that we're actually like aligning with one another and creating something that can be healing. So yeah, that's the long story short.
And I've been able to listen to some of your sound baths, your sound healings, and they are profound. And so I'm glad that the universe set that up and gave you the aha that day where you started to sing and do the energy at the same time. I've never quite experienced anything like it. So you're definitely on to something, and I'm glad that you're doing it and you're helping people. You had mentioned to me also about your relationship with forgiveness. I'd love for you to tell listeners, where are you now in your life with forgiveness? How has that lesson shown up for you?
Whew. So that's a doozy of a conversation. But if I had to distill it down, what it came down to for me is that I realized that I had so much shame about my own behavior. I I will sum it up to say that I was not the best person in relationships for most of my 20s and like half my 30s. I didn't show up for people in the way that I needed to. I wasn't honest with my partners about the things that I needed in a relationship. And instead I would, be dishonest and go and find those things elsewhere. Right. I was, a serial cheater for many of my relationships. Fortunately, I managed to clear that up for most of my marriage, but that was ultimately what ended the marriage many years before it actually ended, was that I did go outside the marriage. And so it was interesting because, I came to a place of forgiveness for the person who assaulted me, for the people, that was not the only sexual assault I've experienced in my life. But I came to a place of forgiveness for those people because I was finally able to give myself the grace to understand the reasons that I had hurt other people. And not to excuse it, not to say that it was okay for me to do those things, not to say that it's okay for somebody who assaults somebody else, to do that, but just to understand that that was coming from a place of deep, deep suffering and pain, and deep, deep shame about not being able to articulate the things that I needed and wanted in my life. And so when I came to that place of grace for myself, and just so you know, that's not like an end point, that's an ongoing process. I started to be able to have grace for the people who had hurt me, for the people who had potentially passed down trauma in my family. And as I got deeper into energy work, into plant medicine work, and started having these experiences of connecting with my ancestors, connecting with other entities that maybe are from the spirit world or have crossed over from this world. You know, I had a couple of experiences with family members that had passed on, and seeing their pain and what they had endured in their own lifetimes to pass on that type of pain, to pass on that type of trauma. And it brought me really to my knees. You know, it wasn't a sense of pity, it was just a sense of tragedy. That it's so tragic that so many people in this world have endured so much. And the only support they've ever found for that pain is to re-perpetrate it. And that's been the model for so long. And I think finally, you know, starting probably in the 60s, 70s, but definitely much more now in this century, people are starting to understand how that gets passed down. You know, we've got epigenetics now that understands that gene expression can shift in just one generation from a traumatic event, much less a lifetime of trauma, right? And so we're understanding that this isn't just a behavior that's passed down. This is something that is part of our physical body and our physical makeup. And so to have compassion for what those people endured, and that, you know, we all have to take responsibility for what we do in this lifetime, but there weren't the resources, you know, that there are now. There weren't the therapists. It wasn't okay for war veterans, for instance, to admit that they had night terrors, that they couldn't sleep. And so, you know, I read somewhere that the boomers were raised by parents with PTSD. They had all just gone through these multiple world wars, right? And what kind of trauma, even if you did go to war, what kind of trauma is that passing down to your children, right? And so we are all now in this lifetime, you know, and in this time in human history, really being called. And this is where I feel, you know, my mission is so important. My personal mission intersects with what is happening in the world, is that we are being called to heal those things and to actually shift our own DNA back to something that is a healthier expression.
Your honesty is piercing. You know, as I sit here and I'm listening to the story that you're sharing, I just can't help but think to myself, wow, if everyone was as honest as Colleen is, the world would be a very different place.
Yeah, well, you know, we're told that so much of what we think and feel is wrong or is bad. And even if you're not, you know, steeped in a particular, you know, religious dogma, you know, because I was raised in the Methodist Church, which is not a particularly guilt cultivating section of Christianity. Nevertheless, I had a lot of shame around things that I now view are perfectly normal, and things that if we could communicate those things to one another, that the negative energy around it could be diffused, because we just recognize that that's a normal part of living.
How different the world would be. And I think, you know, hopefully that's the direction that we're headed, and that years from now or generations from now, you know, this maybe wouldn't even be a topic then. And that people can just live their life and be kind and be open and be honest and be more accepting of each other. So I appreciate that. Before we let you go today, I want you to share whatever tips or insight you have for people that are listening to this, that maybe are having a rough time, or maybe they're, you know, in that space in their life where it's a pivot point, or there are things that have gone really bad and they want to change things. You'd mentioned delta and theta wave music, and maybe tell us a little bit about what that is, and then whatever kind of last words of insight you have for listeners would be great.
Sure. So one of the things that I use a lot of times for my shamanic training, one of the things that I am required to develop is lucidity in my dream states. And so, many people have heard of lucid dreaming. So, one of the things that helps me with that practice are the delta and theta wave music. Alpha wave music will also work, but alpha waves are generally, well, I should explain what those waves are. So, our brains function on basically four levels or wavelength frequencies, right? And so our regular waking state is called beta waves. And that is our conscious state. That's when we're, analyzing. That's when we use our logic and things like that. Meditation is one way to access the alpha wave state of your brain, which is a state of more openness we can call it, the quote unquote flow of things. And so people who practice meditation regularly or other practices such as pranayama and things like that are meant to take you into those brain states tend to have a deeper sense of openness and compassion for the other, because it does connect us to those parts of our brains that see that we are all connected, right? Now, the delta and theta waves are actually dream states. So those are the two main brain waves that are emitted when we are in either a heavy sleep or a dream state, or both. And so I have been I use the app Insight Timer, and there are a bunch of different composers on there that offer delta and theta wave music for sleep. But I know that it's available on YouTube for free as well. And so I highly recommend, if you are working on being more lucid in your dreams, if you're wanting to just remember your dreams more, that music will help you get into that state. I also find that I sleep better in general when I use that music to induce a deeper sleep, and it, from more of a performance perspective, the quicker I get into the dream state, the quicker my subconscious can sort out all of the things of the day, do its surface cleaning so that I can go deeper into those states and travel to some of the places that some of the worlds that I'm learning to build in my dream state.
And that's a whole other topic of conversation.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, this was amazing. I loved hearing your story. And I know that's not all of your story, it's just a sliver of it. But I think that by you being as vulnerable and honest as you have been during this interview, you will inspire other people to be the same way.
Thank you so much. I don't tell this story very often anymore because it doesn't hold the emotion that it used to. And I don't feel the need to share it unless, for instance, a client just really needs that empathic connection to understand that I've been through something, right? And so I appreciate the platform to share it from a place of being much more healed about it. So I really do appreciate that opportunity, Dallisa. Thank you.
Absolutely. You are giving people hope. So thank you, Colleen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dallisa. I really appreciate, again, this opportunity.
To connect with Colleen or to find out about her sound healing events and sessions, visit soundheals.love. Stories like this one are important to tell. It reminds us that even during the darkest times, we can always find light. We can always choose faith over fear. For exclusive content, please join my Spark Plug members-only community and apply to be a guest on this show. Find out more at spiritandspark.com.